Let me welcome all our audience today to this series of episodes that I think all of us will enjoy very much. We have as our guest speaker for those episodes someone who has come all the way from England, particularly from Kent. He is a servant of our Lord, and we are really extremely blessed to have him with us, speak to us about lots of things that I'm sure a lot of the audience, if not all the audience, will want to hear about. Our guest is Father Peter Farrington, the servant of St. Albans Orthodox Church in Kent, England. He is an Orthodox priest, and I'm not going to tell you anything because I'm sure that you will want to hear from him. His journey ever since he was 3 years old until where he is now, serving as a priest in the Orthodox Church within the Patriarchate of the Coptic Orthodox Church. I know it might sound a little bit strange to some of us, but allow me to welcome dear Father Peter, and to start our episode with him, asking him, first of all, welcoming him to Egypt. He's been here for a while, and he's been doing all sorts of interviews and services. And let me ask you, please, Peter, dear Father, how is it that you started your journey to Orthodoxy?
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me here to the program. Yes, it might seem strange that I'm a British person who is dressed as a Coptic Orthodox priest and is sitting here in a wonderful church in Heliopolis in Cairo. In fact, I am really a Coptic Orthodox priest. Actually, I'm a British Orthodox priest, and the British Orthodox Church is part of the Coptic Orthodox Patriarchate. I have a wonderful bishop, Metropolitan Seraphim, who is an Englishman, and he is a metropolitan, a member of the Holy Synod of the Coptic Orthodox Church. You may have seen him on television, perhaps. He stands out from the crowd, a tall man, an Englishman. How is it that there are English and British people in the Coptic Orthodox Patriarchate? Very briefly, I will say that the British Orthodox Church has been around for about 150 years. It started in the Victorian times in the 19th century when a Frenchman was ordained a missionary bishop by the Syrian Orthodox Church. And he came back to Europe, and especially to Britain, with the idea or the vision that many of the Christians in the West would want to gather to him and find unity in the Orthodox Church. But in fact that didn't really happen. Many of the churches in Britain were very resistant to the idea that Orthodoxy would come from the East and try and establish itself in the West. And to keep the story very short, for 100 years or more, there was only a very little church seeking to preserve Orthodoxy in very isolated circumstances, seeking to share the Orthodox spirituality and faith with British people. And it was more than enough of a job just to keep the church preserved and held together. I first came into contact with this church in my own journey towards Orthodoxy, and I'm very glad to God that he introduced me to Metropolitan Seraphim, who was a very kind and gentle teacher of Orthodoxy and helped me to become Orthodox myself. In 1993, he was invited to Cairo to meet His Holiness Pope Shenouda, and His Holiness took the courageous and imaginative step of inviting this little Orthodox church to become part of the Coptic Orthodox Patriarchate. It had become separated over the years from the Syrian Orthodox Church because of wars and the great distance that there was between England and Syria. And so in 1994, Metropolitan Seraphim was made part of the Holy Synod of the Coptic Orthodox Church, and very shortly afterwards, as I will speak about in a minute, I was baptized and chrismated into the Orthodox Church. So the British Orthodox Church has existed for a very long time, and has always had a missionary ambition and a missionary zeal, but it's especially in these last years as we have become part of the Coptic Orthodox Patriarchate that our vision has begun to bear fruit in England. For myself, I grew up in an evangelical Protestant household, and my parents were very devout and are very devout. They are still alive, thank God. And they brought me up, even as a small child, to believe in God and to trust in our Lord Jesus with a firm and unshakable faith. I cannot remember a time in my life when I hadn't believed in God, thanks to their instruction. But even as I grew up into my teenage years, I knew that there was much missing from my life. I didn't have that depth of spirituality that I longed for. I didn't have that sense that God was with me all times that I longed for. I felt a sense of isolation and separation from God, even though I was trying very hard to serve him and do those things I thought he wanted of me. I knew that I should live a holy life, but I had no one to teach me how I might do that. I knew that I should live a life of prayer, but I had no way of learning how I might put that into practice. As I grew into a young adult, I felt that I might become a pastor or leader in the evangelical churches. And so I spent 3 years studying for ministry in a seminary, a Protestant seminary in England. And it was while I was there that I really started to discover the Orthodox Church. I perhaps had a very vague idea that there was an Orthodox Church in Russia and perhaps Greece, but I'd been brought up to think that these were very superstitious people who had no real Christian experience whatsoever. But when I was at college training to be a pastor, I found that in our library there were 1 or 2 books about the Orthodox Church, and I read them with very great interest. And I discovered that there was a church described in the books which could stretch its history all the way back to the apostolic times, to the very beginning. And I began to discover that the church had a way of teaching spirituality that I'd never discovered or experienced before. And I started putting some of these things into practice, even isolated as I was, and I found them to be of great help. In those years, I hadn't actually met any Orthodox people whatsoever. I was only reading books and trying to put things into practice.
If I may interrupt
Yes,
this
of course.
extremely interesting talk, and a question comes to
Yes.
my mind. You said something about that you didn't have anybody to teach you how to pray.
No.
Does this have to do with a problem in the Western society, that there were no Sunday schools,
Yeah.
no church pastors, no...
No, it is more that I grew up knowing that I should pray, and I think that many of the older men in my churches and the older women had spent many years on their knees in prayer, interceding for other people, and they had learnt by their own experience how to pray. But as a young man in the 70s and 80s, we had no idea of how to begin a life of prayer. I don't mean that we weren't told that we should pray, but if you remember, the disciples came to our Lord and said, "Will you teach us to pray?" And now as an Orthodox priest, that shows me that prayer is something we must learn, and we must have some teacher to help us to understand. In our Orthodox Church, we are surrounded by the practice of prayer, and it's very easy for us, if we are serious in our faith, to grow up with some understanding of how we begin to pray. We have the Agpeya, for instance, which I have found to be a tremendous spiritual tool and something I would not wish to be without. But in my evangelical background, we had no written prayers at all, so we had no examples to teach us how to pray. And in my own church, for instance, we did not even pray the Lord's Prayer together, because we felt that it was wrong to pray any prayers that were written down. We felt that the only prayers that were true prayers were ones that came from our heart. But because we had none of these examples to learn how we should address God, many of our prayers, especially as young people, were empty of any content. We would stumble over the words. We had no way of recognizing the greatness of God in our language. It's only as I've entered into Orthodox worship that this worship and language of prayer has filled my own heart and nourished my own prayer life with God. So I grew up knowing I wanted to pray, but I was like the Ethiopian, not able to understand the scriptures until St. Philip came to him. No one was there to teach me how to pray.
That's really very inspiring. You said that you studied for a while.
Yes.
And could you tell us a little bit more about those studies and how eventually they led you
Yes.
to make a decision
Yes.
to be baptized?
Yes. When I was at college training for Protestant ministry, much of our studies were of a practical nature, but we did also study some theology. Again, in my evangelical church, we did not give much place for theology. We felt that too much head knowledge, we called it, prevented us having a heart knowledge of God. And I understand that distinction, but it meant that we grew up very ignorant of what Christianity actually taught. It was very easy for us to open the Bible and for many of us sitting in a study to share our ignorance. There was no one there to teach us what we should understand from the scriptures either. Thank God, at least when I went to college, I was starting to receive some formal instruction from Protestant sources. And there are many theological aspects of Protestantism which are true and the same as ours. I came to understand that Christ was truly God made man, and that he remained God while he was also entirely man. We came to understand the Holy Trinity. We came to understand the mission of the church in the world, many good things. But I saw still that there was a great deal missing from what I understood in the Orthodox books I was reading. We had no understanding of the sacraments. We believed that baptism was only a washing in water to show people that I had become a Christian. We didn't understand that this was how we were united with Christ. We did not understand the Eucharist properly. We thought it was only a way of remembering the crucifixion of our Lord. We didn't understand and teach that this was how Christ gave himself to us and continued to nourish us in the spiritual journey. So the more I read about orthodoxy, the more I saw that the Protestantism I was learning at college was missing so many things. And I still feel that there is much good in evangelicalism and Protestantism, many very good people seeking to live lives that honour God. But there are whole areas of important doctrines and whole areas of spirituality that are missing. I cannot imagine now living a day without asking the intercession of the saints. But we were brought up never to ask this. I cannot imagine a week without receiving Christ in the Eucharist. But we spent our whole lives never receiving Christ. So I do not judge evangelicals, but I feel a great sorrow that they are missing out on all of these things. And it inspires me to want to share what I have with them so that they can become the Christians they already wish they could be. So I read many books. At that time there were not so many things in English. There were one or two important books. There were some translations of the writings of the fathers. By the time I had finished my studies as a pastor, I realized I was no longer really an evangelical. I did not know what I was. I knew that I was someone who was conservative, and I was evangelical because I believed in the Bible. I believed I was charismatic because I wanted to see the power of God in my life, but I knew that I was also orthodox in some sense. And I came home, and I no longer fitted in with my little Protestant church. I was too different, and I no longer really believed in the way they were living. And that began a journey for me of perhaps 5 years of becoming Orthodox in a formal way. At that time, there were very few Orthodox churches in Britain, and hardly any that were very welcoming of a British person. I wrote to the Greek church in England, and they sent me a letter saying I should become an Anglican. That was the Orthodox Church for British people, and I knew that was not true. I wrote to the Russians, and they sent me some books in the Russian language, and I knew that they would expect me to learn and become a Russian if I was to join them. Thank God I also wrote to Abba Seraphim, and he invited me to come and have dinner with him, and that began a process of 5 years of meeting with him to learn about orthodoxy. There were one or two others in the area who also began that journey with me. And some of them are still alive and still worship with me in my own little church. But it was 5 years of Abba Seraphim committing himself to teaching us. He started celebrating a liturgy in a place near where we lived so that we could experience worship. It was a very long and slow journey, because at that time it was not clear where we should go if we became Orthodox. The little British Orthodox Church was still separated from the other churches, and we did not feel, many of us, that we could join a church that was not part of the great worldwide community. But all of the other churches seemed to be locked in on themselves and requiring us to become members of other cultures and ethnicities. I think probably at that time there was only one Coptic church in England, and that was struggling to care and pastor for the first migrants from Egypt that were coming. So it was only when in 1994 the British Orthodox Church came into union with the Coptic Church that it seemed all of my answers were there provided. And 1 week after Metropolitan Seraphim became a metropolitan in the Coptic Church, I was baptized into the British Orthodox Church. And that is where my journey then entered another phase.
Before I ask you about how you got the passion and the vocation to become a priest thereabout, you said something about the Greek church telling you, the Greek Orthodox Church advising you to become an Anglican.
Yes.
And you said that you believed that
Yes.
the Anglican Church is not
No.
what you knew
No.
was the orthodoxy that you wanted to follow.
That's right.
Can you please explain a little bit?
Yes, I have many Anglican friends, and in our mission in the British Orthodox Church, in many places we depend on the hospitality of very kind Anglicans who let us use their churches for service. As I said, it is not right for us to judge any person in whichever community they find themselves. It took 5 years for me to become Orthodox, and much of that was not my problem. I was looking for somewhere to join. And so it is for many devout, dear Christians in Britain. They are members of communities where they have been born into them, in families, and that's where they go. But for Anglicanism, it is struggling very much with understanding which way it wishes to go. Anglicanism is the national church of England, and it was created by Henry VIII in the 16th century for particular political reasons, and in trying to become one church for all people, it is not one church for any people. So it has some people who hardly believe in Christianity at all. It has other people who are very evangelical and charismatic, and it has other people who just like to go and enjoy the services in the church. It is not sure what church it really wants to be. And this causes many problems, because there are those in the church who are in favour of homosexuality and women priests and bishops, and there are other people in the Church of England who are very much against this, and so the whole church at the moment is filled with great turmoil and is unable to properly fulfil its service and ministry. And so already when I was becoming Orthodox, I saw that there was these problems. It was not clear to me which Anglican church could I join. There is not one voice that Anglicanism speaks with. And a survey recently showed that 35% of Anglican priests do not believe in the resurrection. So I could not join such a church, even though I wish the people in it very well and love them very much.
I really would like to thank Father Peter for this lovely way of mentioning that we're not here to judge anybody. You spoke about evangelism and you spoke about the Anglican Church. I just want to highlight a little part which has to do with the fact that the Anglican Church was established due to political reasons back in the 16th century by Henry VIII. And it's a big story that if our audience would like to know more about, it's out there in all the books of history. And it's interesting to know that because it stemmed out of a political issue, the varied ways it went is now what you're telling us about. But this does not deny definitely that there are pious people all over in all creeds. But we are looking for the truth that our Lord clarified to you, Father, through the Orthodox Church,
Yes.
and we're really anxious to know much more
Yes.
about this, and this is why we hope to be following up on other episodes. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Father, and thank you for all the audience who are following up, and we're calling on you to please follow up with the next episodes that will be coming up soon. Thank you. Thank you.